Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on Groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want. Hello and welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Alexandra Paul and I'm here with Dotsie Bausch. Hi, Dotsie.
Hello.
So Dotsie, a little while ago, you shared some of your favorite podcasts, and both of us also on previous podcasts have shared some books that have made a real impact on our life. And so today I want to share 3 more podcasts that I am really, really enjoying. And I figure that the audience, because they're listening to our podcast, they might be interested in checking out these other shows. So the first podcast that I want to talk about, and I really love this, and Dotsie, I know you love it too. It's Dr. Cyrus Khambatta and Robbie Barbero's podcast called Mastering Diabetes. Now, if those 2 names are familiar, you've probably heard them being interviewed right here. In fact, they're both so interesting. We've had them on this show twice. So you can imagine that their podcast is also really good. And just a caveat, you don't have to have diabetes to be inspired and entertained on their show. I listen to it all the time and I am very healthy, but I just learn so much. I mean, they do talk about how to reverse type 2 diabetes and to live well with type 1 diabetes. But they also interview so many great guests about just living a happier, healthier life, a lot like we do, Dotsie. And these are things that we all need to hear. And my favorite episodes of theirs are their success stories. Everybody loves a success story where they're shorter and, 15, 20 minutes, and people just talk about the amazing transformations they've undergone while following a whole food plant-based diet.
Yeah,
but
my favorites is Tammy. If anybody runs across the episode where Tammy does her success story, it's like you'll be a basket of tears, joyful tears at the end.
Yeah, thank you, Dotsie. But then Dotsie, you know how Cyrus, he's got like a brain the size of Manhattan.
Yeah.
He also did this entire episode just speaking about fats, and it was riveting. So he's so good about really diving deep into very scientific things, but also talking about the heart, because they both have such a heart. So you'll get great interviews, you'll get heartwarming testimonials, and you'll get Cyrus's wonk. And most of all, what you get is Cyrus and Robbie, who are just 2 wonderfully approachable people who know so much about plant-based diets, health, and living just a really full, joyful life. So check out the Mastering Diabetes podcast. You can also
and the book. We wouldn't want it because it became a New York Times bestseller, right? They came out with that, I want to say 9 months ago. And that's when we had them on the second time to promote that. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, the podcast, they're renaissance. The podcast, the book, and the course masteringdiabetes.org. You can also hear the podcast from there. Well, my second podcast is something just a little different. It's called Presidential. And every episode is about a different U.S. president. But you don't feel like you're stuck in history class because the episodes, they seem to cover aspects of the presidents that are more human. Like one of the questions that the host often asks the experts is, if you went on a blind date with this president, how would that blind date be? How would that person be? So I first started listening to the shows on the presidents about whom I knew nothing, like Chester Arthur and Millard Fillmore and James Buchanan. And then, and by the way, Chester Arthur, if you ask me, who's Chester Arthur, I would not have said he was a president. So I have definitely gaps in my education, which I'm trying to overcome as an adult. But then I really enjoyed those. And then I started listening to them in order. So you can listen to them any way you want, but I just highly recommend this podcast. People will think you're super smart when you bring up Millard Fillmore in a conversation. And it was taped in 2016. So it's all the way up to Biden now. And each show is just about 30 minutes. So it's not intimidating. So now I've recommended a podcast for your body, one for your mind, and now I'm going to recommend one for your soul.
Aw, I love how you're doing this.
This American Life. Dotsie, have you ever heard, it's an NPR show, but it's also a podcast. Yeah. Have you ever heard it?
I haven't tuned in, no. I know what you're talking about.
You'd love it. It's a podcast, and there is an NPR show of the same name. And each week you get like 2 to 4 true stories around a theme. So in our family, we all listen to it. So there's so many times that Ian or my mom will say, hey, did you listen to This American Life this week? It was really good. So I highly recommend This American Life. It's so diverse in the topics that it covers. And let us know on our Facebook group what you think of any and all of these suggestions.
Thank you.
So our guest here today is Tricia Nelson, and she is here to help us all heal our emotional hunger. During Tricia's childhood and teen years, Tricia developed an unhealthy emotional eating and binge drinking habit to cope with stress and pain. And despite her attempts to seek help, she tried therapy, self-help, and 12-step programs. She continued to eat her emotions, and she gained 50 pounds. She was finally able to break free and abolish her emotional eating habits. And today, we're going to learn how. Tricia lost the weight and dove into the psychology behind emotional eating and food addiction, arming herself with the knowledge that has led her to her business today, helping others overcome food issues. Tricia also has a book out called Heal Your Hunger, and we're so excited to hear what she has to teach us today. Welcome, Tricia, to Switch for Good.
Thank you for having me. What an honor.
It's really our pleasure to have you. I know a lot of people are going to learn so much about your journey. Tell us a little bit. Let's start from your teen years, because I mentioned in the intro how you struggled with emotional eating and some binge drinking. Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So I, from the get-go, I think had an unhealthy or at least an abnormal relationship with food, where food was like definitely my number one highlight, and I just lived to eat. And so I love to cook. I love to serve it to other people. I love to go out to dinner. And of course, just anytime I love to eat. And I thought that was the long and short of it. Like, I just like food. But as I got older and began to gain weight, I realized that I wasn't normal with food. I didn't just like food, that food was serving me in ways that it didn't for other people. It just was my everything. It was my go-to for everything. And then in my adolescence, I began to drink. In high school, I went to prep school, and there was a lot of drinking going on, and I took to it like a fish or like a duck takes to water. Although it was so bad by the end of high school that they called me Trish the fish. Okay. So that's a clue that something's wrong. So I like to drink. I like to eat, and I was kind of just, honestly, looking back, of course, I came to see that I was anesthetizing my feelings. I was, running from myself with these addictive habits. And so the problem for me is that I gained weight very easily. So I didn't, and I, of course, tried to be bulimic, and I couldn't do that. So I just gained weight. And so I became overweight. And by age 21, I was 50 pounds overweight. And it was really uncomfortable for me, and I hated it. And I had a roll in my tummy that I would scrunch up in my hands and imagine cutting off, like you can cut fat off the side of a steak. Or, I thought, well, maybe I'll get some disease where I automatically lose weight and I don't have to diet. So, some pretty outrageous thoughts about my body and my weight, because I was out of control and because I couldn't, make my body do what I wanted it to do. So I had a lot of shame about it. did all I could to cover it up. But, I was always trying to find a solution, but it was more on the symptomatic level. So the symptom of food and weight, I was doing diets, exercise programs, pills, potions, lotions. Then I started getting into the psychology of it. So I was going to therapy. I went to an eating disorders therapist twice a week for an entire year. I went to 12-step programs. So I was really, I was at it. Like I was really searching. And the problem is, I could lose weight for a period of time, but I always put it back on. So I had like 5 different sizes of jeans in my closet because I never knew what size I was going to be. I was one of those yo-yo dieters. And so that's really, how it went for me. And at some point, thankfully, I just thought to myself, I can't do this the rest of my life. I would go like gain 30 pounds, then lose 20 pounds and feel great, but it would last like a nanosecond and then it'd be up the scale again. And I just thought, this is not a healthy way to live. Something's wrong because nothing I do sticks, So that's really when I started to wonder, like, if I was hopeless. I guess I felt hopeless. But what happened in that time is that I met somebody who had been obese, lost the weight, and had a different approach and guided me as my mentor through a process of healing the underlying causes. And that's what I needed. I really needed to look beyond the symptom of food and weight to what was really going on, what I was really hungry for. And that changed everything. And so for, 3 decades now, I've been blessed to live in a thin body and to not be obsessed with food and to have really so much peace around food. I'm not cured, but I have this level of peace around food and with my body that, I'd never, ever thought possible. And in the process of healing and doing so much research on this, I started working with my mentor to help other people. And so really for decades now, I've been blessed to be able to show other emotional eaters this very simple system for overcoming emotional eating. And Heal Your Hunger came about when I broke out and started my own company 4 years ago and started doing it like only virtually, so I could help people around the globe with this process of healing. It doesn't take 20 years of therapy. Like it's actually a very easy, simple, not easy, but simple process, I would say, that lays it out and just makes it, very straightforward of kind of what the emotions are, what the traits are of the emotional eater, and really what the steps one has to take to heal.
Tricia, we're definitely going to get there. But I'd love to go back a bit and really give people a picture, an experience, a feeling that they can understand of what a real typical day would look like. I mean, the details, especially for those that may be in the midst of disordered eating behavior. What did a day of disordered eating and drinking might look like for you?
Well, for me, it was a constant obsession. So I was never really not thinking about food. Alcohol for me was not as much of an obsession as it hadn't developed to the point where I thought about it all the time. Food was my number one love. Food, I always like to say the ooey gooey chewy foods, so anything with sugar and fat and starch, which are like my 3 favorite food groups. So, if you get them in a croissant or a, whatever, like a yummy gooey something, the ice cream, those kinds of sweets. I was very much a sugar addict. So anything sweet, I was definitely addicted to. And so for me, it was just general eating too much, with periods where I binged. A day in the life is just trying to cover up my fat, and then trying to get as much food as I can get without embarrassing myself or without paying a price, So of course, if I was eating too much, I'd try to exercise it away. Like I would, go on runs and this kind of thing, but I would, I could never really exercise as much as I ate. And then some days were like actual binges where maybe at the end of the week, I just felt like, God, I've worked so hard. I'm going to get my favorite food, the sort of plan it. I get my favorite foods some ice cream, and I'd bake a pan of brownies, and, and then I'd get some, you have to salty with your sweet, of course. So I'd get some like nuts or potato chips or something like that. And so I'd have my little like reward at the end of the week, and I'd sit down in front of the television and I'd eat. But then, I wouldn't intend to eat everything, but I'd end up eating so much more than I planned. And I just felt so sick and bloated and so angry at myself. Like, what did I just do? Like, I can't believe it. And I'd feel sick to my stomach, and I would pass out on the couch, with some crumbs down my sweater. and then, I mean, honestly, sometimes when it was really bad, when I felt gross from eating too much, like I'd be like, after like watching like 3 shows or something, I'd look at sort of the carnage of what I'd just done. And I'd have all these wrappers, and empty containers, but I wouldn't always finish everything because I was so full. And I actually would like sweep up all the wrappers and like remaining food. Like there was a package of cookies, I ate half the package or something, or a bag of popcorn, and I ate 3/4 of popcorn. Like I would throw all the food in the trash, and I'd be like, that's so gross, I'm never eating that again. Like those foods just disgusted me because I binged on them, and I felt gross. But the most shameful times were when I would like fall asleep on the couch and wake up like 2 hours later or something, and be like 2 a.m, and I'd have a little bit of space in my stomach left, after kind of digesting a little bit. And I'd remember that I had some cookies that I'd thrown out, and I'd go and I'd get them, and I'd be like, I can't forget. I threw out good cookies. Like I paid good money for those cookies, and I go and I'd eat them. And I just thought, I am like the worst person in the world. Like I literally just dug food out of the trash and ate it. So it just brought me a lot of shame.
Yeah, shame is a recurring, both, as you might know, both Dotsie and I also had eating disorders. I traveled a different path in that I did do 12 years of therapy, which I thought was helpful, but it was actually OA that stopped me from purging within a month. But I, unlike Dotsie, Dotsie, you've pretty much, I mean, to me, she is so healthy with food. She has a very, very healthy outlook on food, and I still have some food fear. My relationship with food is a little tenuous, more tenuous than I would like. Dotsie, you'd consider yourself completely cured, right?
100%. Yeah, I wanted to dive into that later because I heard Tricia say like we're never cured, and I definitely would argue that vehemently because I made it to the other side, and there's not a single second of a single day that I'm obsessed or thinking about food, and there isn't a single food I won't allow on my plate except for my friends that I love, animals. But that's a spiritual, soulful reason. So yeah, we can dive into that now or later. Yeah. Tell me your philosophy there.
So, I mean, I consider myself, and it's more of a 12-step OA type philosophy, and I started in Overeaters Anonymous. I went there when I went to my first OA meeting when I was like 15. I went with my sister, and I didn't think much of my sister, and I didn't think much of the OA meeting, so, but then the seed was planted. I was very grateful that the seed was planted, and I went back for myself when I was 18 years old. But then I slipped and slided and, got absent and broke my abstinence like for several years. But it was through OA that I met my mentor, and he worked with what he called hopeless cases, people who couldn't get it, and that was me. Like I couldn't stay on the plan. And for me, it's because I needed so much of a deeper dive. And so, my experience today is, it is a journey. It's always a journey. One's relationship with food is a journey, it can be a beautiful one, even though it's really hard and crosses many decades. So much of the time, it's a part of who I am, it's a part of who I am. And it's informed my life and all my healthy habits. Like I wouldn't have a daily meditation practice if I weren't like pretty sure that if I didn't do that, I might slide back into the food. So for me, I've built up a whole life of self-care and self-love. that makes me seem totally free. I've seen so much from working with this condition for so long. I've seen so much carnage, that I don't like to consider myself to be, I don't like to use the cured word, because I know that were I not to do the things that I do on a daily basis, I wouldn't have the support. And then the next thing would be turning to the food. So that's why I don't consider myself cured. I'm free on a daily basis by the grace of God. I'm free. I can't even believe how free I am. It's just not a pull for me, but at the same time, it's contingent on, the life that I live and the life that I teach my clients to live. So it's sort of like a diabetic, like they don't have to live with the pain of diabetes or the consequences of diabetes, so long as they take their insulin, so long as they do, have a healthy diet. So were they to stop those things, it can come back, and so that's kind of how I consider it with my condition, is like, I sure look cured, I sure sound cured, but I just like to have the humility of saying, hey, I'm not out of the woods because I have to do, like, knowing that about myself, that I could go back. And I've had times where I, gained weight, and slipped. And that's humbled me, to the point where I just know I have to keep a healthy respect for the power of addiction, and it's kind of what Alcoholics Anonymous is based on as well. Is like, I've known a whole lot of alcoholics who, you would never think they would ever drink again. And yet they do, and they often die. And it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. Like, they were heads of companies, like they were, matriarchs of families, like they, and they died with a needle in their arm. It is such a powerful thing, addiction, that I just never want to presume that I've conquered it. It's just sort of a posture of humility that it works for me. Like, it just works for me.
Mm-hmm. So it's more of a practice. I mean, that's what I'm hearing you're saying. It's like,
Absolutely.
It's a practice that you're in every day.
Yeah.
Is there more of a fear of, I've heard you just mention like gaining weight a lot. Is there a fear of that specifically, or is it more a fear of going back into those old habits that were so ugly to you?
Well, I have had the experience of thinking I'd never binge again. And then I binged again, and that's horrifying. Like, that sure sucks. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here. So I've had that experience, but when I deconstruct how it happened, it was absolutely because I, started, thinking I was cured and I didn't need to do certain things. So I let certain disciplines go, and so then, see, here's the deal. It's really not about the addiction. I know you guys know this, but it's not really about the thing itself. It's not about the eating. It's not about the food or the alcohol. It's really about my state of being and my consciousness, and I am somebody who doesn't handle stress well. So I don't handle stress well. And so I'm looking for stress relief, and I'm either going to get stress relief through an healthy habit, or I'm going to get stress relief through a healthy habit, and so it's nice to say, well, why wouldn't I choose the healthy habit? But, there's a saying, candy's dandy, but liquor is quicker, and so it's like the same thing. Like, I might know meditation's good for me, but if I haven't been meditating for a while, I want the chocolate, and so it's just like, I have to live in a way that I don't need habits to relieve my stress, but I have to manage my stress. I need to manage my thoughts. I need to manage my, my relationships, my level of communication. In my experience, I don't suffer from eating problem. I suffer from a living problem, and so that's really what I teach my clients, is how to live so that you don't need to hide out in food. If you have a life that's, happy and healthy, you don't look for a place to go run to. You're not looking to bury yourself with something. Whereas if I'm not taking care of my communication with people, when I'm not taking care of my negative thoughts or negative concepts about myself or any of these things, stuff's going to pile up. And then I need something, I need to turn to something. So it's very much about a living problem, not so much about the substance itself.
You said something about finding out what you were hungry for,
Yeah.
instead of food. So you mentioned that it wasn't until you were in your 20s, I think, where you were able to find the answer so that you stopped using food to cope. Uh, Therapy didn't work, the self-help books didn't work, OA didn't work. They probably had some positive benefit for you, but it wasn't,
Yeah.
you didn't see measurable change. What was it that you were hungry for? What changed when you met your mentor? What did he teach you? We want to learn those secrets.
Yeah. So in my experience, and I think this is really why the OA experience fell short for me, is I craved connection. Like I felt so much loneliness in my life. You know, I had a depth of pain that, first of all, was unaddressed. You know, I had sexual abuse in my past, and I never talked to anybody about it. I did talk about it in therapy, but I didn't really heal to the level I needed to heal. But overall, I just, you know, I needed connection, and my food was sort of a replacement for that. Because I was also afraid of people, you know, so it's like, I need people, but I'm kind of afraid of people. So I craved connection at a very deep level, and I craved connection with people who had depth. You know, I craved depth, I guess, I craved emotional depth, you know, and when I was in an environment where people just talking about food and weight all the time, I was hungry. You know, I didn't want to talk about weighing and measuring and this kind of thing, because it didn't feed my soul. Like, I needed soul nourishment. You know,
that is what the 12-step program. Were you in How? Is that why?
No, I wasn't. But no question that that's the idea. And there's definitely that there for some people. I think I just didn't get it to the extent that I need. I was pretty hungry.
Yeah,
so
everybody.
I was pretty hungry. So I just needed it at a deeper level, and I got it, you know, elsewhere. I'm eternally grateful for Overeaters Anonymous. That's where I started. You know, it's just that, you know, there are a lot of people who don't get it there, you know, and there's people who don't get it in my program either. It's not a one size fits all solution. It's just not. But it is a journey for everybody. And, you know, what I know is food was my teacher. You know, food was my teacher, and food and fat drove me to a solution, and to it is a spiritual solution. There's no question about it. It has to be. You know, it's just that I just craved at a very deep level a connection and a depth, emotional depth that, you know, one meeting, you know, I would leave meetings hungry, like spiritually hungry. I would need more. I just needed more. I mean, what can I say? So that's really what I needed. That's what I try to provide for my clients, because it's just, there are a lot of people in the program, any of the food 12-step programs, who do get hooked on the obsession with food and weight and measuring and that kind of thing. And to me, there's a place for that. I understand, you know, there's some people who really need that, but at the same time, it can cause people to miss the point also about the spiritual program of healing. You know, it's sexier to just, you know, focus on weight loss. I mean, the whole reason I gained weight in the first place is because I didn't want to look at my stuff. You know, I was afraid of myself. You know, I was afraid of myself. I was afraid of looking within. I was, as I said, twice a week for a year in eating disorders therapy, but I didn't, and it's not to knock my therapist. She was a very good therapist, but I didn't feel safe enough to face the things I was so afraid to face, you know? And so I needed a different solution. I needed a different level of safety. You know, to me, it's all about safety. You know, when we feel safe enough, we're willing to look at things we otherwise can't face. We don't feel like we can bear to face it. And it's not a conscious thing like, oh, I'm not going to face that. I mean, sometimes it is, but usually it's not. It's subconscious. It's just a feeling of, you know, I felt like I had so many crazy thoughts in my head. I thought if anybody ever knew what I was thinking or feeling, like they'd lock me up. Like they would lock me up, you know? So I had to get to where I had somebody I could talk to and feel completely safe with, in order to realize, oh, I'm not terrible. Like I'm not a bad person, you know? And it's just whatever it takes for somebody to have that. And it's not a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm. What were you thinking or feeling? I mean, you gave a little bit of what you're feeling, but why would someone lock you up based on what you were thinking? What were some of the thoughts that came in?
a lot of it had to do with just my, not understanding how anything works. But I hated people I was supposed to love. I had people in my immediate life who just drove me bonkers, and I hated them. I hated them. I might have even had some really bad thoughts about them, but you're not supposed to feel that way. You're not supposed to hate, people you love. And so my MO was to cover it up, like just put a smile on my face and act like I liked people. I would have best friends who I just would want to strangle. And I didn't know how to deal with that. And so I judged myself mercilessly. I judged my thoughts. I judged my feelings. And that's my experience with emotional eaters is, we have feelings we don't think we're supposed to have. So we pretend not to have them. And then we don't have feelings we think we're supposed to have. And then we pretend to have them. So it's like I would go to a funeral and I wouldn't feel anything. And I'd try to eke out some tears just so people didn't think I was a sociopath, when maybe I just wasn't feeling it. Big deal, So it's I did so much judging of myself and condemning of myself that I didn't realize that I was a lot more okay than I thought I was.
Mm-hmm.
I think authenticity for me was the key.
Yeah.
I was not authentic to myself. And when I
Me
started
either.
being authentic, that was when I stopped having the cravings to binge.
Yeah.
So Dotsie, does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think it might on a varied level with almost everybody who's been through that. It was completely different reasoning that I have versus Tricia, or even versus you, because we've had lots of conversations about it, like the core issues that I was fighting internally. But yes, once I just was able to come into myself, both emotionally and physically, as feeling the source of the pain in my body and come back into my body for solace, it changed everything.
Yeah, because it's to be out of alignment with who we are is such a, I think that is what creates so much of the compulsion to eat or to do anything is then, on the outside, it presented this person, but on the inside where I lived, I was a different person. So I had imposter syndrome. I felt like a phony, and I also took a lot of energy to keep that up, that facade going. And it's it really is about making peace with who we are and realizing how we feel, who we are. First of all, making peace with the things that perhaps I'm not happy about, but then coming just to a level of self-acceptance where I'm not always thinking I'm not enough and who I am isn't going to cut it, because that's a belief I had. I couldn't possibly be myself. I couldn't possibly be the person I'm meant to be because somehow that's lacking. And that creates this dissonance that we then have to cover up with food.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about the addictive personality, and are there traits that you see in people who have food addiction and maybe other addictions? My theory's always been is that we pick our poison according to our personality, and I was a good girl, so I wasn't going to go do drugs, or smoke, but so I picked food, which seemed innocuous and certainly was not. So tell us a little bit about the addictive personality that you see. You've been doing this for 30 years. Are there any common traits?
Yeah, I talk about in my book something that I've identified as the anatomy of the emotional eater. And so these are specifically 24 personality traits that make up the emotional eater's personality. And these aren't traits that only emotional eaters have, of course. Lots of people with addictions have them. I just find that there's certain ones that are very much specific to emotional eaters more than your average person. And these are personality traits that I think we're born oftentimes from trauma in our childhood. So, when we have things happen as children, we have very few coping tools available to us. So food is one, of course, food's a big one. That's, we can't go score drugs when we're 6 years old, and being sexually abused, so what's there? We've got sugar, sugar's right there. It does anesthetize the pain. So, but there are other coping tools as well that we have when we're in a dysfunctional home, that we pick up, and they do help us get by. Like they help us survive that abusive situation, or an alcoholic parent, or, you know, abandonment. But when we bring those same personality traits into our adult life, you know, that's when things get wonky, because they no longer serve us. We don't even need them like we think we do. We're just in the habit of using them. So an example of this is people pleasing. You know, in my experience, and you talk about being the good girl, I was too. You know, I had, you know, a problem. We had a problem child already. I'm like, I'm not going to be that. So I'm going to be a good girl, you know? And so people pleasing was a coping tool for me growing up. But as an adult, you know, it backfired on me, because when I'm bending over backwards to please people and knocking myself out and, you know, exhausting my adrenals, trying to be all things to all people and saying yes all the time, what happens is that I'm not only, you know, stressed out and burned out, but I'm also resentful, because guess what? Nobody's ever as pleased as we plan on them being, right? So like, damn, that didn't pay off. And so then we're pissed off. And, you know, I would solve that problem by going home and having what I call the I deserve it binge. So it's like, screw them. They're not appreciating me. I'll reward myself, you know? And so that's an example how a very outworn coping tool, which that's how I got attention as a kid, as being a good girl, you know, but that coping tool wasn't serving me anymore, and was actually driving a good part of my overeating, because I was just tired. You know, I was tired from trying to be that person that everybody loves. So that's an example. That's one example of, and that's bringing it back to what I was talking about earlier about the living problem. That's where it's a living problem, not an eating problem. The eating is the result, but what's the cause? You know, how I'm showing up in the world is what's really causing my cravings. You know, cravings don't just hit me. I actually set myself up for them based on how I'm living. And so that to me, that's what my work is about. Heal Your Hunger is really to dig into, why am I so hungry? And it has to do with so much of my error beliefs about myself and about how to get by in the world, and then how I am operating in the world. And I have to make changes. Like a diet isn't going to even begin to cut it. You know, I've got to make changes in how I'm living and showing up in the world, and what I'm thinking, in order to have a different experience around food.
Mm-hmm.
What are a couple of the other very most common traits that you see that might help some of our listeners?
Sure. Another one is just being super sensitive. You know, my experience is people with eating disorders are so sensitive. You know, we're not only overeaters, but we're overfeelers. You know, like to me, like life kind of hurt. Like people's pain. I was very empathic. And so I would take on people's pain, and I didn't know how to set boundaries. So like if somebody was hurting, I would just be there almost crying with them. I would feel their pain. And I'd also, another trait is we're, on account of being so sensitive, is we're rescuers. We're rescuers and caretakers, you know, and, you know, wherever there's somebody with an eating disorder, there's usually an alcoholic close by, you know, because alcoholics love to be taken care of because they're such a mess. And the person with an eating issue is always right there, because we're such good caretakers and rescuers. You know, it's part of our identity. And again, born oftentimes from our childhood, having an alcoholic parent or somebody we had to take care of, or being the oldest child, or having something going on in the family where we had to grow up so quickly. But then it doesn't work in our adult life, because again, we get tired and we get burnout and we get resentful, and we don't live for ourselves. We're not ourselves. Like we're just living for other people. So being sensitive leads to all kinds of problems, but it's not inherently a bad thing. I'm still really sensitive. It's just that I don't like, I know how to manage it now. Like I know how to manage it when I'm hurting, you know, when I feel other people's pain. I don't jump in to rescue anymore. I have boundaries. It's like, I know where I end and they begin, you know, so I can carry the message, but not the mess, you know? And so that keeps my life saner. You know, it keeps my stress down, because when I felt like I was responsible for everybody around me, it's a heavy burden to carry, you know, and then I'm not taking care of myself. And then I'm reaching for food all the time for quick energy, because I'm so exhausted all the time and spent. And so that's another trait I would say, or a few traits I would say. And another one that's very, very typical is we tend to overthink. We're big thinkers, and we're always wondering, like, what are they talking about? What are they talking about over there? Are they talking about me, or why do they do that? Is that about me? And, we're always rehashing conversations, what he said, what she said, what I said, should I have said, it's like our minds are so exhaustively busy overthinking, and worrying, awfulizing, like thinking about the worst case scenario. We tend to have a lot of anxiety, a lot of chatter in our brains about terrible things that could happen, a lot of fear. So these things obviously lead to overeating. That's why carbs are such a big choice for us oftentimes, because it gives us that serotonin hit, kind of calms down our mind temporarily. And so we've got to have a better way. Carbs are not the answer, so we have to learn to meditate. We have to learn some spiritual practices, some breathing techniques and things that can help us calm down our racing minds. And my experience is a lot of addicts, this is true for a lot of addicts, we have racing minds, and addicts don't like to meditate because they're so on the go all the time, just trying to keep one step ahead of themselves, running from themselves. Boy, oh boy, the dividends are, endless, when we learn to be with ourselves, to just be with ourselves and be with our feelings. And when we have new tools for dealing with our feelings, we can be, I just recently broke up with my boyfriend. And so I have grief, but in the past I would always eat over grief. I just stuff it all down or busy myself, so I didn't know it was there. And now it's there, I'm up in the middle of the night crying, and it's okay. Like, it's okay, because I'm just going through it, and grief, it's an intruder that you have to let in, and you have to let it stay however long it wants to stay, and then it will leave, but you have to give it its due. And so, that's really what we need to learn is healthy tools. I tell people that, write about it, talk about it, pray about it, healthy tools that can enable you to just sort of be with yourself without needing to run.
You say there's a big difference, I think most would agree, between an emotional eater and a food addict. How does one identify which one they are?
So my experience is, in all my years, over 30 years of research, is that we're really hardwired to have an emotional connection with food. I think we're just made that way. It's why it's such a beautiful thing to have a mother breastfeed her child. It's emotional for both. It's a bonding experience, and I think that's true with food as well. Like, if we didn't get some kind of experience of eating, then we wouldn't maybe do it, and then we wouldn't subsist as a species. So there's definitely some emotional stuff there, and it's just not that way for everybody to whatever, it's a spectrum. Like, we're all on the spectrum, but it is a spectrum. So on the low end, in my experience, is emotional eating. People can go overboard now and then. Yeah, not a big deal. On that high end of the spectrum is food addiction, where, like me, I would sit down and consume 3,000 calories, in a sitting, and feel disgusting. So, and then and then I promise to stop the next day, and it could go on for 2 weeks. So it's definitely a spectrum. I actually, what qualifies where somebody is on the spectrum are two things in my experience. One is control. So what's the level of control somebody has to scale back or to kind of course correct? You go on a cruise, you eat too much, you drink too much, you gain 5 pounds. Not a huge consequence if you can course correct, do some extra jogging that week, cut out sweets, boom, you're back in your jeans again, so that's somebody who has a good level of control and very few consequences. On the high end of the spectrum is somebody who's been battling food and weight for decades. They've got physical symptoms from it. They have, gut issues and brain issues, and maybe diabetes or autoimmunity, or, the list goes on and on, joint pain, not to mention anxiety, depression, not wanting to have sex with their spouse, like it's endless, the number of consequences that can build up. So it's a number of consequences. And then if somebody somebody who's a food addict can't course correct, can't just stop on the dime. Like, a lot of doctors or well-meaning people will say, well, just moderate. but not everybody has that ability. And somebody on the high end of the spectrum can't just moderate. Okay. So, so that's really how we qualify where somebody ends up on the spectrum. But I do have a quiz on my website. It's a free quiz that I highly recommend people take, because they'll get a personalized score, which will show them exactly where they are on that spectrum and then action steps they can take.
You've talked about how connection is really important, taking care of yourself and having boundaries. This is what I'm hearing from you in terms of for the audience, if anyone is struggling with this. And you mention a little bit when in the research I've done about behavior. So you've talked about the spirituality aspect. What aspect is behavior? Because a lot of what I believe is the way we live our lives is habit. And so how do you address that in your program with people?
Yeah. So, I mean, a big one, like I've talked, it's kind of in an overarching way about slowing down. And so definitely, those are, we have habits of busyness, so slowing down is important. But more specific to your question, what I've been doing for over 32 years now is a morning routine of meditation and prayer and reading and writing and walking. So I have something called the 6 self-care success secrets. So there's 6 things. The only one I didn't mention is talking. So these are habits that I incorporate into my day on a daily basis, which might seem really overwhelming to somebody. So I don't start my clients doing them all at once. We kind of layer them on. But it's, but beyond that, like we talked about earlier, the people pleasing, like we got to stop doing that. Like we have to stop people pleasing. We have to set boundaries on our time. We have to start speaking up, like I teach 10 secrets to expressing yourself with confidence. Because my experience is emotional eaters don't really know how to speak up for themselves. They keep quiet, and then blow, say what you mean what you say, but don't say it mean, that's the key. So there's just a lot of living habits that absolutely, like you said, they have to change. Like these are really the foundational tools that my clients need in order to experience like that true freedom from the food obsession.
I'm glad you mentioned boundaries again, because I'd forgotten that you talked about it before, because I'm a health coach also, and I have clients who are so overwhelmed with their kids and their full-time job and trying to keep healthy and have time for themselves is so difficult. But what I see is, so that's why, by the way, full confession, one of the reasons I've really, I don't have children. And Dotsie doesn't either. Tricia, I don't think you do.
I don't either.
Right? So it's easier for us to set boundaries. But I have clients who just won't change because they're so afraid of letting one ball down that their family will fall apart. And so what do you say to people like that? Because I've protected myself from having to even make those choices, because I also don't handle stress well, or didn't handle it the way I wanted it to handle it perfectly. And so I have a life that I've set up 20, 30 years ago. I knew myself, but a lot of people made choices that got themselves into a life. And now they're like, oh my God, I don't think I can handle this. And they go to food. Can you talk about that?
I absolutely can. I love that you brought that up. And I have a lot of clients who are mothers. I have one client who's like 34 years old and she has 5 children. She adopted 3 who were in danger. And then she had 2 of her own, so she's got 5 little ones running around, and she does her self-care, she doesn't have to work. So that's one difference, is that she works a lot at home, but I just mean she doesn't have a profession outside her house. She was a nurse. But she plans on working again, but only because she has this foundation of self-care. So maybe she doesn't meditate for as long, but she still meditates, and I have several mothers in my programs, but they need my constant reinforcement that to take care of yourself is not selfish, but actually selfless. And it's just, I think as women, and as mothers, in this culture, we think we have to do it all, and we think it's all up to us, and we think that if we don't do everything, it will all break and fall down. And that's not true. People just get used to us doing everything. It's quite convenient, but we don't have to do that. We can delegate certain tasks, in the home, and we can put a sign on our bedroom door that says, "Shh, I'm meditating. This is mommy's quiet time," and trust me, I have clients whose kids get so used to their moms taking time for themselves and meditating, and the positive benefits of that. She doesn't yell when she's done meditating. She's so much more loving and cuddly, that they start to be like, Mom, isn't it time to meditate? When she starts getting a little rattled, it's like, Mom, go meditate, would you? So the thing is, and I think it's just a reframe. Like we think, oh, I can't possibly take time for myself. I've got so much to do, but it's like, we can't afford not to take time for ourselves. And that's the truth. And no mom wants to be, frazzled and miserable and bitchy. That's not who we're supposed to be. That's not who God made us to be. So when we take time for ourselves, we can be the person we feel good about being. It's not even supposed to be. It's the person we feel good about being, and that's, our families get the best version of us when we do take time for ourselves. That's what's missing, is the realization that when I'm just running myself ragged, they're not getting the mom they signed up for. They're not getting the wife they signed up for, and when we take time for ourselves, everybody wins. And I know it sounds easy to do. It's not easy to do, but it takes work. It's a practice. That's why meditation is called a meditation practice. It takes practice. But it also takes reinforcement, and the more, as I said, you can be around people who are also living this way, you don't feel like you're bad anymore, because it's like, well, that mom's doing it. Maybe it's okay if I do it too.
You have 3 health mistakes you say that smart people do. And when I asked you the question before, you didn't mention anything about habits. You didn't mention anything about food, which is, a lesson to us all that it really isn't about the food. It's about, like you said, it's a life problem, and we need to look at our lives and not at the food as much. But your health mistakes, you do talk about some habits around the kitchen.
Yeah. I mean, there's very practical things also that people can do. I mean, I have something that I teach, which is called 3-meal magic, eating 3 meals a day with nothing in between, which 12-step programs advocate as well. I've just found it to be the sanest way of being around food, like this whole 5 or 6 meals a day, like that's, to me, exhausting. Like don't eat a bunch of small meals, because you're gonna be thinking about food all the time. 3 meals, and close the kitchen down. Like in between the meals, it's not mealtime. And it makes it very simple. Like it makes very clear when it's time to eat and when it's not time to eat. When you're going to Trader Joe's and they're passing out all these yummy sausages, that they just cooked for you, and the smells that's wafting through the store. That's not my food. Like that's just not my food. So it just makes it very clear and easy. And I just find people telling me, gosh, it takes all the guesswork out of it. And it's actually, because some people, when they've been snacking all day long, they feel like I couldn't possibly just do 3 meals, but they don't realize how much of their day is wasted in all that. Should I eat? Should I not eat? I think I'm hungry. Am I hungry? I'm hungry. Or, should I get another one? I don't know if I should get, it just goes on and on, the obsession. Whereas imagine when you just take that out of the picture, you have so much more time for yourself, so the 3 meals and the 3-meal magic, as I call it, is super helpful. Just simple things like drinking more, get enough water in the day, making sure you're hydrated, because when you're dehydrated, it's easy to think you're hungry when you're not, that's super, super important. Putting away the scale, not jumping on the scale every 5 minutes to see if you've gained or lost weight. I was controlled by the scale. Like I lived by the scale, and it's, if I give the scale the power to make me feel good by telling me something I want to hear, I also have to give it the power to make me feel bad by telling me something I don't want, and either way, it's a trap. My experience with the scale is, when it tells me something I like, I'm like, oh, good. Like subconsciously, there's the little thought in my head that's like, oh, good, I have wiggle room, right? Like, ooh, I lost a few pounds. I got some wiggle room now. I can eat such and such or whatever, so that's a setup. And then when it tells me something I don't like, then I get in self-pity and I'm kind of pissed off. And I'm like, what's the point of going to the gym? Like, it's not working, you know? So it's like, it's just sort of messes with my head. So, so I just, and I also so want people to get out of diet mode. Like, just, it's such a culture and we're so used to it. And we've been in it for so long. I just want people to just start realizing that they don't have to manage it all. They don't have to be in control of it all. You know, there's really a surrendering process that is so healthy, and just realizing if I take care of myself, if I set boundaries on my time, if I don't try to be all things to all people, if I, you know, eat healthy meals that have enough fat in them and have enough, you know, protein and that kind of thing, then things are going to level out. And especially if I deal with my emotions, like if I start addressing my emotions in a healthy way, and I'm not emotionally eating, my weight will take care of itself. And so it's just hard to trust that when we've been so trained to, you know, really manage it and control it, you know, and it doesn't work. So I just say, any diet gimmick you have, just try to put it to the side and try a different way, you know. And the other thing is the community support. Like, I think no matter what community you're a part of, you have to be a part of a community to heal. Like, it's just, it takes all the pressure of it. It gives you the soul nourishment that you have to have in order to heal, because you can't just take food away. You have to replace it with something else. And my experience is the community and the love is so much of what that something else is about.
You have 3 things that you say, you call it PEP.
Yes.
Painkiller, escape, and punishment, which is the reason that people overeat.
Want me to go into that a little bit?
Yeah. Go into that a little bit, because I'd like to talk to you about punishment, because I believe that we don't punish ourselves, that humans always do everything for a very, very good reason. So even though it might be a punishment on one level, it's something we're gifting ourselves because it benefits us on another level.
Well, okay. I'll just talk about what I mean when I'm talking about PEP. And that is, this is specific to how food serves us. And this is true with other addictions as well. So we know what it does to us, but it's also doing something for us. And so, and I think this just helps people sort of get in tune. If they're like, I'm not an emotional eater, like I just like food, you know, this is just kind of to help people just drop into what might be going on. So in my experience, food is a form of painkiller. Like when I have emotional pain, you know, when I eat, it numbs the pain, pure and simple. You know, I used food as an escape. You know, when life seemed overwhelming, this is no more true than during the pandemic, you know, when everybody was overeating, you know, it's like I use food, not everybody, but you know what I mean? So food is an escape because my reality was scary. So fear, it can drive that need to escape and just be like, I'm out of here. Like the fact that I could walk out my door and die, like that's a very uncomfortable reality to be in. I'm just going to check out with food. And we also use food as a form of punishment, which is counterintuitive because food seems like a reward. You know, whenever I ate, it was because I was, quote, treating myself. But for me, when I would overeat and then abuse my body with it, I was doing that as a form of punishment, which I feel is driven oftentimes by subconscious guilt because we are so hard on ourselves. That's kind of the PEP test that I tell people. Look for the pain, look for the fear, and look for the guilt. Like, what are you feeling bad about? You know, what are you afraid about? And what are you hurting over? You know, that's really where we can start, is asking those questions and seeing if maybe my 5 trips to the refrigerator might be motivated by one of those things.
Thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. Everybody look for Heal Your Hunger by Tricia Nelson, and she'll give you even more really helpful tips. But you've given us a lot today, Tricia, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey folks, okay, back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review, and zoom, zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.